Welcome to the University of Michigan Dentistry Podcast Series, promoting oral health care worldwide.
Now, if your carving and your burnishing has been accomplished appropriately, the finishing and polishing procedures should be relatively simple. You would first check all of the margins going from tooth to amalgam and from amalgam to tooth around the entire restoration, looking for imperfections. Hopefully, again, if you have carved and burnished appropriately, there would be none. Now, we're satisfied that in this particular instance, we could proceed to abrasive discs, waterproof 3/8 inch discs, and then to a slurry of silex and tin oxide. However, if there was a problem with contour or a marginal problem, it may be necessary to use a green abrasive stone that I am projecting in front of you. And this should be used with the utmost of care. Because of its abrasiveness, it will cut tooth structure very rapidly, and you could do some irreparable damage to the cementum or to the gingival tissue. It might also be necessary to use a zero flame-shaped finishing burr if, again, you had imperfections in your amalgam. In this particular instance, we are going to proceed with the use of our abrasive discs along our margin, paying special attention to maintaining the buccal contour that we have strived so hard to attain in the carving and burnishing state. Now, by applying the contrangle in appropriate fashion, remembering that one wishes to keep the contour, working on the occlusal portion, one can begin to see the luster of the amalgam coming forward. Now, working on the mesial proximal area. Now switching over to the distal. And as you work towards the center of the restoration, very light touch is used so that you do not flatten that surface off. Now, when a disc is going to be used on the cervical, it is appropriate to protect the gingiva with an instrument. In this case, we're using a tarnoplastic instrument to protect the free gingival margin. And once again, with our disc slanted in the appropriate fashion so that we do not flatten out that buccal surface, we can gently finish our cervical. Now, as your disc wears down, it oftentimes is necessary to change. While we are changing discs, we will do a preliminary check with our Cowhorn Explorer, going over our margins. Now, what you would like to attain in this restoration is a mirror-like finish with margins that are not detectable going from tooth to restoration or from restoration to tooth. That is the goal. Here is a spot on the mesial that we are detecting a bit of a catch, meaning that the amalgam at this point is a bit heavy. Around the rest of this restoration, it would appear that we have attained the marginal adaptation that we are seeking. Once again, going back with our disc. Now, you cannot expect to have a highly polished restoration unless you have a well-finished restoration. The polishing technique of silex and tin oxide will do nothing more than smooth the surface and add luster to it. Once again, we will check our margin. Now our surface on this amalgam along the occlusal margins and along the cervical, distal, and mesial have been finished to a point where we can now begin our polishing sequence. Now it will be necessary for you to mix up a thin slurry of silex and a slurry of tin oxide. This is applied with a Young's rubber cup. Once again, we must be very, very careful to protect the gingival tissue. It is always wise to use an instrument as you approach that cervical. Now, again, with these rubber cups, a lot of heat can be generated, and so you must be careful that you don't press too hard. But on the other hand, you must press hard enough that you can effectively polish the restoration. Now, it is very essential that these slurries are not too thick, because if they are, they will cut very rapidly and you'll lose the contour of that amalgam quite quickly. Gentle pressure, keeping the instrument in motion, not concentrating on any one area for any length of time, protecting the gum as you go down towards the cervical, allowing the contour of that rubber cup to fit around your restoration. Again, checking to make sure that we have maintained the type of marginal adaptation that we once had. Now proceed to the tin oxide. Now the tin oxide has very little abrasiveness to it, of course, and it is merely a polishing or shining material. Leaves a very high luster to the surface. As I mentioned before, it is very necessary that you do not exert too much pressure on this tooth so that you generate heat. Again, if you're going to go down in the cervical area, very careful that you protect the tooth. I think you can now see the very high shine to it. Now, if your condensation has been very good, you should end up with a dense restoration that is free of pits, that has good marginal adaptation, and can attain a high luster as you see in this restoration. Once again, we will rinse our restoration off. Now that you have cleaned out the interdental areas, your restoration is clean, checking over your margins to make sure that you have maintained the marginal adaptation, also that you have maintained the buccal contour in this particular area. If you have condensed well and you have good marginal adaptation, you can attain a very high mirror-like finish on these Class 5 or any other amalgam restoration. After this scrutiny, you have now finished your Class 5 restoration.
You've been listening to a presentation from the University of Michigan School of Dentistry, which is dedicated to supporting open learning and open educational resources. This recording is licensed under the Creative Commons. It may be reused and redistributed for nonprofit use. Please attribute materials to the University of Michigan School of Dentistry and redistribute under this same license. For more information on how this and other University of Michigan School of Dentistry recordings may be used, visit www.dent.umich.edu/license.